Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, the Brexit leaves behind a trail of drastic political and economic changes in its wake. Britain and EU countries navigating the changing seasons. And the property developer giant China Vanke rejects a move by its largest shareholder to oust the company's board, the latest in one of China's most high-profile corporate struggles to date. We begin today's show with the UK post-Brexit. 2 weeks after the historical referendum, Britain seems to have fallen into chaos. The fight for Mr. Cameron's leadership has started, and the Labour Party is also working on getting a new leader. One important leave behind the scenes campaign advocate, UK IP leader Mr. Farage said he's got his country back and would like his life back as well. Meanwhile, the economic turbulence continues, not just in the UK, but in EU and global markets as well. Before we turn to our panel, let's take a look at this.
Brexit is turning out to be a UK crisis. Tens of thousands have taken to the streets of London to protest against the leave outcome of the Brexit referendum.
We actually are Europeans, and I want my great-grandchildren to grow up into a world which is united, a united Europe, a united world, but we are Europe.
Dubbed regret, a wave of anxiety has also emerged among some who voted for Brexit, especially after Leave campaign leaders broke their promises on migrant limitation and NHS funding. The referendum has plunged Britain into political chaos. With the resignation of Mr. Cameron, the first round of voting for new Tory and UK leadership has begun. Meanwhile, UKIP leader Nigel Farage, who led the Leave campaign, says he will stand down from leadership. Though Jeremy Corbyn is still Labour leader, he is facing strong opposition inside the party. Scotland and North Ireland are working on staying on in the EU, which may trigger a split inside Britain. The UK economy has also suffered. The Bank of England is going to minimize the impact of Brexit on the economy with monetary easing and the possibility of reducing interest rates to zero.
I'd say Brexit has created significant uncertainty, and we believe this is likely to dampen growth in the near term, particularly in the UK, but with repercussions also for Europe and the global economy.
EU leaders don't want the uncertainty to keep damaging the Union. They are calling for Britain to make a decision.
There will be no negotiation whatsoever before notification, and we are inviting the British authorities to make its intention clear. We don't have time to lose. We cannot add to uncertainty, and so we would like to know where we are heading at.
The aftermath of the Brexit referendum is still developing. To what extent it will spread remains unknown.
And for more of the discussion regarding the Brexit and its aftermath, even though that process is still going on, I'm joined in London by Mr. David Buick, who is the market commentator at Panmure Gordon. And also in Berlin, in Germany, we're joined by Joseph Yanning, Senior Fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations. And meanwhile, in Athens, Greece, we are having Mr. George Zakopoulos, who is the International Center for European Integration. He's a researcher over there. Welcome to our program, gentlemen. At this moment, may I begin by asking you, Mr. Buick, what do you make of the political changes apparently going on inside your country? Many of the signature Leave campaign politicians have quit their next stage, at least so far. What does that mean?
Good afternoon. I think the problem that worries us most is instability and a lack of leadership. It looks like the political process in this country is full of inertia, and we are leaderless. And this is a very dangerous state of disrepair. The situation is also exacerbated by the Remain campaign refusing to accept democracy, which is leading to extremely dangerous political instability. I think the one thing that we are extremely grateful for is that we have a very calm hand on the tiller in the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who's shown great statesman-like qualities in trying to keep markets calm and reassuring everybody that the banking system is strong, that they've got 10 times more capital than they had at the time of the banking crisis 10 years ago, and that there is plenty of stability, and that we are at that because the Treasury has been moribund, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, by his very high standards has been pretty quiet, apart from saying that he'd like to cut corporation tax down from 20% to 15 or 14% as soon as there is a budget.
Okay, Mr. Yannin, what do you think? Political instability or not at this moment inside the UK?
Well, I'm coming back from London just this morning, and I can say that the bitterness that I encountered on both sides is deeper than I thought it would. My sense is that this referendum hasn't solved anything, but has rather polarized the country a bit more. And as David was saying, it is indeed a leaderless environment, so that doesn't speak well for an orderly process, which, in my view, is the principal interest of other EU countries such as Germany, is to get this underway in an organized, fair, and somehow timely fashion.
Having said that, though, can the UK's economy, Mr. Yanni, you've been doing research about the European countries, including the UK, for a long time. Can its economy, depending on the leadership coming from the central bank, as Mr. Buick just argued?
Well, you know, the central bank can provide some stability, which I think is important at this point. But what it cannot do is do the job of economic policy making. Now, what the political actors have to do now is to come up with an idea for a process that will set up the UK as a business location in a different political context. And they have to make the necessary decisions and take the necessary steps to link the UK to the European and the international community and economies, and that will be a lot of work, and that has to be done well and smart.
Mr. Buick just pointed out there are two things going on at the same time. One is the political process, whether you call it stable or not, inside your country, seek the next leadership as the Prime Minister. Second is UK's process of Brexit. Negotiations are still at the very initial stage, not to mention so many different opinions coming between the UK and the EU as a whole. So can the countries handle these two at the same time, which could be the core issue here? Mr. Buick.
Let me make the first observation that we've got project fear turned into project reality, which is, as we have an expression in this country, has been served up like John the Baptist's head on a charger. So if you want fear and if you want fallout from markets, you've got it. And it has been self-perpetuating. Where I slightly disagree is I don't believe these negotiations have even started. You've indicated that they have. I don't think they're anywhere close to starting. But I think what I'd like to suggest is to try and throw a little pragmatic thought on the subject, is that in the European Union, I'm told there are something like 500 million people. And whether people like it or not, they all have to eat. They all need clothes on their back, and they all need houses. And if we're going to behave like petulant children and throw our toys out of the pram and stamp our feet, that's going to get us nowhere. So for some political stability to return to the United Kingdom is firstly, the prerequisite. Secondly, I want good sense to prevail. We are not wanting an ugly divorce from European countries. We just don't like the way the European Union runs its business. That doesn't mean that we can't have very cordial relationships and good trading relationships, which will take an awful lot of time, power, and time energy to organize. We currently have a thing called Project Unit run by Oliver Letwin, who's an advisor to Prime Minister Cameron, with 20 people. I verily suggest we need 500 people. This is a very, very tricky situation and requires total focus from a large number of people to be able to cope with the bureaucracy that currently prevails in the European Union.
All right. Mr. Zokopoulos, while you were listening to Mr. Buick, Of course, there are different opinions in other countries of the EU. What do you make of the complaints coming from Mr. Buick after the UK already voted for Brexit in the referendum? What is likely to be the next step? Negotiation or changes among the EU countries themselves, or what else?
Thank you for inviting me. From a Greek perspective, the result in the UK referendum was not welcome, of course. Greece is a country under supervision and receives now its third bailout, and therefore the main concern of Greece is that the Brexit might lead to a collapse of a taboo which was existing in Europe since 2009-2010, and the main concern and fear is that potentially from the moment a country will leave the European Union, then there could be more flexibility for other countries to leave either from the European Union or from the Eurozone. And although Greece receives its third bailout, it's a matter of negotiations between the government and its creditors up to what extent the country will receive more money. I think what Greece needs to do is to implement all the structural reforms, and in that way not to be directly influenced by the vote of the British citizens. From another perspective, however, the positive news for Greece is that possibly after the UK referendum and the Brexit vote, Europe could possibly lead negotiations towards a closer political union, which is what Greece and other periphery countries in the European Union want.
Well, you want to put some silver lining of the issue, it could be, but at this moment, Brexit has meant instability, many argue, not only to the UK itself, as earlier our panelists argued, but also to other EU member countries as well. Many economists forecast the Brexit would at least temporarily reduce the UK growth, with uncertainties hitting domestic demand and weakening the pound, and when the resulting impact on EU goods exports to Britain, which make up some 2.6% of rest of EU GDP in the year 2014. So those, of course, are the numbers over there, but those are only numbers. Yet the most difficult part, Mr. Yanin, is what to do among the other members of the EU and whether the negotiation about the Brexit will start. After all, it has a 2-year deadline.
Well, Tianbei, it is first up to the British to submit the request to leave the EU under Article 50. And that's when the 2-year period will start. And only then negotiations will begin. And they will be, as has been said before, they will be very complex and complicated and probably take more than the 2 years transition period then to put them into effect. But there has been a lot of debate since June 24, the day after the referendum, on what Europe should do now. Is that now the time for Europe to move closer together? And there have been a number of proposals put on the table from various sources. As I see it, that in the north of the European Union, particularly with this government, the approach is rather to not rush things, to not now launch another refounding of Europe, because that might only fuel the fires of the populists, but rather try to deliver on some of the more important crises that Europe is facing, and deliver in the eyes of the people with effect. That is, get things done on economic policy, get things done on immigration and asylum, get things done on improving the security situation in Europe's neighborhood.
Is my understanding correct, Mr. Yanin? It seems that you're trying to suggest that, well, after the EU needs to wait for the UK to submit their papers before any negotiation, any process of Brexit could happen. So why don't we concentrate on our own house cleaning while waiting for the Brits to come up with these papers? And yet people are asking, when are they going to do that? The more time they are postponing it, some suggest, is likely to bring even more instability into the EU countries. Mr. Yanin.
That's right. That's right indeed, Tianbei. If there was a scenario unfolding where simply the British government would sit on that referendum result and not submit the request to leave, then nothing happens. And there is nothing that the other member states could do to kind of force the British to trigger Article 50. So that's up to them. On the other hand, you know, with the new leadership election process underway in the UK, resulting in a new Tory Prime Minister in September, the Conservative Party in Britain is committed, politically committed, to do something about that result. So at some point, they cannot filibuster any longer. They will have to submit that. And that's when this process gets underway.
Right.
What the Europeans, the other 27, have to do is to see that their policy process doesn't get held up entirely because of that British limbo.
Right.
Because they need to be taking decisions. They need to be moving issues forward as we speak.
Mr. Buick, how long will the quote-unquote British limbo, as being put by Mr. Yanni, will continue? What should be the priority for your country? To have a political leadership by October 1st and then come up with the solutions, or actually the bureaucracy now should work when it comes to this process?
I think there's an awful lot of work that can be done behind the scenes, because I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to have a government or a prime minister before the 1st of September at the very, very earliest. I think one of the reasons why we're in this situation at the moment is that the perception, even by people who voted for Remain, as well as those who voted to leave, is that we don't believe that the European Union is open to reform at all. We think they're stuck in their ways, that they're heading headfirst into federalism. And this is certainly the impression that is being conveyed since this decision, which I think disappointed them, all the member states in Europe, all 27 of them, and also 16 million people in the United Kingdom.
I see.
But we can't just wait for indefinitely for a period of inertia to finish. There can an awful lot be done in terms of the fact that here in the United Kingdom there are several people who know exactly what is required as regards trade negotiations, and they can be preparing the ground without exactly speaking to their opposite parties within the European Union. And the same can be done for the European Union.
I see.
We are still part of Europe, the United Kingdom, and we need to live in coexistence. We may not want to be governed by the European Union, but we still have a long-standing love affair with all 27 member countries of Europe.
Wow.
And we want to keep that going, regardless of whether you're a supporter of Remain or Brexit.
I certainly understand your passion toward Europe, but many of your fellow countrymen and women voted the other way. But let me go to you, Mr. Zokopoulos. At this critical moment, your country has been in crisis and has been in intense negotiation with the EU countries. And yet, it seems that the EU countries have another crisis, how to deal with Brexit. Not much attention anymore on your country, even less than before. So what is the way out for you guys? And is coming to China, asking for more cooperation opportunities, the best way?
Well, from a Greek perspective, it is positive that the first review of the third bailout was concluded in June, and now we are looking forward for the second review to be concluded in September. Certainly, the fact that the European Union now pays much attention to Brexit can have a double effect. It's not clear what it will mean for the future of the negotiations. But for Greece, what the government needs to do is to implement all the structural reforms, which is critical for the country to receive new tranches by its creditors. And in that regard also, China will play a positive role, because now our Prime Minister is in China. He attempts to attract investments. The privatization of the Piraeus Port Authority was recently concluded. All this can be positive in spite of an environment which increases Euroscepticism in Europe. Greece is a country which is a Europhile country. Obviously, our citizens, Greek citizens, are not happy with the modus operandi with the European Union right now. But I strongly believe that if we remain committed to the bailout, then the future will be positive for the country.
I see. Mr. Yannin, before we go, very briefly from you, how attractive still is European countries, including economies like Greece, for outside investors, such as countries like China? With all of these instabilities going on, with all of these questions in the air, is it an opportunity, or is it very much a place that should be put in doubt when it comes to investment?
Well, I don't see a reason for an international investor to neglect the European market because of this. But I do see every reason for investors to ask themselves, are the locations that we are seeking or identifying, are those locations with a stable perspective inside that market? If you want to access that market, or if you want to build up production or distribution inside the single market. And that will lead investors to take a much closer look whether or not they should not rather opt for the center than in the periphery, which has attracted a lot of foreign investment, non-EU investment in the past 2 decades. Probably a bit more will go to the center because it's simply safer.
All right. A lot of questions need to be answered. That's why it always makes the discussion fascinating. I'm sorry, we are really running out of time. We have another topic coming up, and the panel is already waiting for us. For now, we have to bid goodbye to the three of you, and yet we would like to continue our discussion in other programs in the future. Thank you so much, David Buick, Joseph Yanin, and George Zokopoulos. Appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got our final segment coming right up. Chinese developer giant Vanke fights back after attempts by its largest shareholder to oust the company's board as the drama continues to unfold in one of China's most high-profile corporate struggles. You're watching World Insight coming to you live from Beijing. Vanke is a Chinese real estate developer that originated in the Chinese southern city of Shenzhen in 1984, has grown today to be one of China's top enterprises. Wang Shi, Vanke's founder and chairman, was once dubbed as the business leader of the decade here in China. Now both are embroiled in a battle for control following a critical turn of events.
Battling for control. A high-stakes battle within China's largest home builder, China Vanke Co., heated up as its biggest shareholder moved to oust most of the company's board, including its celebrity chairman, Wang Shi. Vanke has been embroiled in a tussle for control since last year, when Bao Neng replaced China Resources as the company's largest shareholder. At the time, Vanke management labeled it as a hostile takeover, suspended trade of its stocks, and began preparations to restructure its assets.
Bao Neng enters Vanke as Vanke is cheap enough, while Vanke's management team chose to look for a new big shareholder when Bao Neng entered. The move made the problem more complicated. It formed a multi-relationship between Vanke with Bao Neng, China Resources, and the Shenzhen Metro.
Earlier this year, Vanke re-emerged with a plan to make Shenzhen Metro Group its biggest shareholder through an equity swap. However, the plan met opposition from China Resources and Bao Neng. 3 days after rejecting the plan, Bao to oust 12 directors in Vanke's current board, including company founder Wang Shi and core management executives, blaming them for not carrying out their responsibilities properly. China Resources has said it opposes the plans to oust the company's board. Instead, it wants to consider the future restructuring of management in a way that would benefit the company's growth. Vanke resumed trading on Monday in the Chinese mainland market, but shares dropped sharply, hitting the lower limit for 2 consecutive days. Meanwhile, the Shenzhen Stock Exchange has asked Vanke's 2 largest shareholders to clarify whether they had partnered up to block the company's $6.9 billion deal with the Shenzhen Metro Group. The tussle is expected to downgrade the developer's ratings. Ratings agency Standard & Poor's says possible changes in Vanke's board would send negative signals and affect the developer's financial stability.
For more on the Vanke shareholder battle, we are here joined in our Beijing studio, Mr. Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, sir. Also welcome in our studio, Professor Wu Changqi, who is a professor at the Guanghua School of Management at Peking University. Welcome as well, Professor.
Thank you.
Joining us from New York, we have another professor, Professor Max Wolf, Professor of Economics from the New School University in New York. Welcome. So, very first question, the simplest yet the most fundamental.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important issue at stake in this huge battle for control of China's biggest home builder? Mr. Wu.
I think this apparently that really touches the fundamental, actual cornerstone of a capital market and the market system at all, because related to ownership, property rights. And the question here, we have confused who the owner of the China Vanke, right? Apparently in the market system, in capital market, is the shareholder, jointly the owner of a company.
All right. Professor Liu, do you have different views? What is the most fundamental issue that we need to debate and look at about this?
It boils down to a governance issue in which the relationship between shareholder and the management. So whether there is a fiduciary relationship between a principal and agent, and who is the master and who is the servant.
All right. Professor Wolf, of course, you are observing the whole battle from afar, but certainly it made headlines in so many media organizations, web pages. So what do you make of it, the nature of it?
Yeah, so I think the most complicated board struggles have two elements. This one has both. So one is between managers and owners, which my colleagues sort of brought up, which is who runs a company? Is it the beneficial owners who are served by those with a fiduciary duty to management, or is it the management that runs the company? And this is as old as management, this struggle. But we have two struggles inside Vanke here. The other one is between different owners, proposed owners and other owners who are more hostile in their intent. So does the management pick which owner is more powerful, and who's more powerful between managements and owners? The two classic clash in history are both in effect in this story.
It is a dramatic story. I could hardly, even as a journalist, to keep up with the daily development of this ever-going story.
Yeah.
So let me begin by chopping it down for several segments before we can help our audience understand better. And we are not taking any position at this moment because this is still an ongoing battle. Let me ask you, the role of the founder, Professor Wu, Mr. Wang Shi is a very charismatic business leader from China. He founded the company back in 1984. 1990s, he gave up the right to own as the shares of the company. Rather, he said he wants to become a manager with his credibility. And now he is into this problem as to who has the final say about the fate of the company. What do you make of this? The founder's relations with major shareholders.
I think that's indeed, that's because China is the primary stage of the market economy. That case reflects it very, very vividly. Because indeed, in a market system, that owner, in this case, in this company, reflect in the hand of the shareholders and shareholders. But actually, at the beginning, Wang Shi himself may or may not realize that the key, critical importance of the shareholding. Otherwise, he would easily arrange a control stake of shares that literally just like my other company, they have present day, the company would be much more developed in the corporate governance and corporate structure.
Very interesting, Professor Liu. Mr. Wang said back in the 1990s and also later in a speech just a few years ago, 2 years ago, I believe, he was suggesting the reason why he gave up the shares of the company as the founder was because he wanted to run the company with credibility, not by controlling interest. That he was trying to prove to the rest of the world about his capabilities. So what do you make of this personal choice, particularly at this stage of China's enterprise development?
Well, the founder of any organization, particularly when they get old and they get very sentimental. Well, but law is law. In law, we say past consideration is no consideration. Even if you donated the whole family asset to set up a company and then this company is bought by other shareholders, then you got to wash your hands out. So that's a fair solution. So, you voluntarily give up the right you might have deserved, and then, well, people thank you for that, but people will not tolerate you to play beyond the rule.
Interesting. Professor Wolf, should that be the case?
It probably should be the case. The other evolutionary solution to these kind of problems is to allow a little bit more of a variety in the types of shares. So we've even seen some large Chinese companies be excited about listing in the US as opposed to other locations because of the ability to separate voting rights around shares from ownership of shares, allowing an individual or group of individuals with a very small position in ownership to have a huge voting right. So there are ways to separate out ownership from control. Those have not been done there, and I would certainly agree with my colleagues here that ownership has to matter for property rights to be in place and to basically induce investor confidence. And I think also the number of sort of scandals and stories swirling around their individual is unusually large.
Well, the scandals we wouldn't touch too much on because it really has nothing to do eventually with the nature of the company. But one thing is very important. All of these wouldn't happen until one of the shareholders, one of the biggest shareholders, which is Baoneng, that is an insurance company, tried to come in and up his shares to become the majority shareholder. And of course, Mr. Wang Shi, the founder of it, found it was rather not necessarily in his favor. He suggested there was risks involved with this insurer with massive amount of money unknown about its source, and therefore bringing instability, as he argued, Professor Wu, to the company. That's why it began the battle. He wanted, together with the senior management team, to bring in Shenzhen Metro, another company. So what do you make of this stage?
I think the myth, one of the myths is Wang Shi, he believes he's very capable and his top management team is very capable. But the reality is the Baoneng could accumulate so much of the shares, that means the share price must be undervalued. That means the management team may or may not let the shareholders to realize the value of the company so that Baoneng could buy at a low price.
Interesting. Let me bring your logic to Professor Wolf for his judgment. Professor Wolf, do you agree with that logic put forward by Professor Wu about shares being undervalued under Wang's leadership? And also, at this moment, Professor Wolf, you probably wouldn't know that China is still at the very primitive stage of enterprise development, particularly private ones. And therefore, the so-called poison pills does not exist, meaning companies could be easily bought if there is no majority shareholder. And then it can be up to a hostile takeover, quote unquote. So under those circumstances, Professor Wolf, what is your judgment?
Yes, so clearly I think we're going to see a little bit of a maturation of the types of shareholder arrangements and the various ways that managers and owners divide power. And poison pills and special voting rights are just unique ways that historically some managements and some owners have responded to problems like the one we see right now. Separate and apart from that, I do think that when you have an embattled chairperson and an unambiguous, what's sometimes called a palace revolt here among the board members, you always see a huge discount applied to the shares. So by definition, the shares are undervalued, assuming, of course, that the market had a pretty good and reasonable sound valuation on them prior to all this tumultuousness and uncertainty. So it does look like there is no prophylaxis. There's no way to prevent somebody from getting a huge position in these or other shares, particularly when they're advantageously underpriced. So that, yeah, that does look correct.
All right. On the other hand, Professor Liu, another interesting player. The original biggest shareholder of Vanke was a Chinese state-owned company, conglomerate called China Resources. There were stories about Mr. Wang, the founder of Vanke, having good relations with the previous manager of China Resources, and now it seems the situation have changed. Let's just put those relationships aside. Talk about the facts. So, Professor Liu, what do you think would be the roles of China Resources vis-a-vis the roles of Baoneng, which is trying to be the biggest shareholder of the company? Will what's it normal for one company who is the biggest shareholder at the moment sit on its hands to wait for another company to come in to become the biggest shareholder and take its place?
Well, I think, it is universal that different shareholders may adopt a very different approach.
That's right.
China
they might have different
Resources
agenda, they might have different purposes.
China Resources has been welcomed as non-interference, and they would, okay, I like you, Mr. Wang, let it go. I just want to share the result. I do not really want to intervene in the process. But Baoneng seems to be rather active and aggressive, and they look at the situation in a very different way. That okay, you, Mr. Wang, you earn nearly 10 million, and then you travel and you make a whole splash of yourself. So which is not really
My question rather
alliance.
is more about the relations between or the biggest shareholders, China Resource and also Baoneng itself, rather than between the Baoneng and Wang. So what do you make of the two biggest shareholders' relations?
Well, I think, as two biggest shareholders, they all look for, sustainable profitability. So there's no doubt about it.
Is that assumed or is that known, do you think?
I think that's at least,
the stability of whom?
That's right. The stability of Vanke, because they invested into it, they of course they would like them to bring the benefit, the return. But the issue is that they have very different the expectation and the management style. So that can really make the whole situation or even the expectation of Mr. Wang rather blurred.
Okay, Professor Wolf, I know you have to leave very early, so let me throw the last question to you before you leave. What do you make of the relations among the biggest shareholders of a company? Not necessarily just Vanke, but others as well. Could they have alliance? What kind of alliance is normal? What kind of alliance is not? And what would they mean for the eventual fundamental interests of the company?
So, I think what clearly emerges from all this is there are sort of alliances that are shifting among major shareholders. I don't think that's just a Vanke story, but we see it very clearly here. Additionally, I think we see a lot of the best, most informed investors believing this is still a crown jewel asset that has been beaten down quite a bit. So it does underlie the sense that many of the smartest folks in the room are excited about the asset, and that whatever the traditional alliance base that the company should have among its institutional shareholders has shifted and broken and is in the process of reforming. And in the process of reforming that in a key company, you always have more cooks than you end up having dishes to come out of the kitchen, and that can create some creative recipes, not all of which anyone wants to eat. And I think we're seeing all that live, which is a testimony to the transparency, but sometimes, when you watch how the dish is prepared, it becomes more fraught to eat that dish.
Very interesting analogy over there. Thanks so much, Professor Maxwell from the New York University. Let me come back to you, Professor Wu.
Important point is that just to discuss the Hong Kong-based China Resources and Shenzhen-based China Vanke. Actually, there used to be alliances. They have a common ground.
Thank you.
And if that's the case, and they would, I think, China Resources rather to be investor and let's see that Vanke grow. But of course, what is Baoneng's enter changed all this. And Vanke, China Vanke's senior management, they approach to Shenzhen local Shenzhen metro companies. Actually, that's a changed situation. That China Resources very alerted. Without largest shareholders' consent, that the Vanke's management team took such drastic action, I don't think is wise.
And then there's another twist.
Moreover, China Resources has its own big business unit, that the China Resources Land. And Vanke is the largest real estate developers. The last thing China Resources want to see is Vanke turn to be its competitor. And they compete against China Resources Land. Of course, in China real estate market, there are plenty of competition that would not consider the collusion, but they would rather to be good relationship.
Very interesting. We've been explaining to our audience many of the twists and turns consider one of the most drastic changing corporate control story we're seeing here in today's China. Having said all of these, we're not taking positions because things are happening all the time and we do not have extra information than what the public already know. So at this moment, Professor Wu, let me ask you, fundamentally, the issue is whose interests should be most protected in a battle like this? Okay, big shareholders or big shareholder, the senior management team or the founder, or the investors who have put their money over there, including the mama and papa shop investors, who put their money there to believe in this real estate developer. Whose interest this moment should be really protected? Professor Wu.
Actually, that's interesting. In addition to the interest you have mentioned, there are other interests for employees of Vanke.
That's
the
right.
buyers of Vanke's properties. They're all interested stakeholders. But we have to make it clear, according to the certain rules. That is currently that shareholders meeting should make the final decision.
All right, shareholder making final decisions. Okay. Professor Liu, 20 seconds for you.
Yes, by corporate rule and also by capital market rule, shareholders, yes, make the final decision. And this is, but the argument actually Mr. Wang and his team is proposing is that, okay, socially we got to be more responsible for those
so what do you
investors.
believe should be the rights that should be protected? Whose rights?
Play by the rule of the corporate law and also the financial market rule.
Whose rights?
Yeah, I mean, number one, the shareholders' right.
All right. We'll see that story, how they would turn out. It is a very important case study.
Yeah, we should learn from this.
Really a lot to learn from
the
this
as
it evolves.
Right.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.